Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Khôra Rise of an Empire from Yellow Games. Now, this is part of their expert line, a new line of games they started doing, which I personally think some of their prior games could fit into the expert line, but this is the start of their expert line. That's an unnecessary tangent to this review. Khôra Rise of an Empire is an abstracted civ building game. It's a game where you're trying to build up your civilization across 9 rounds, and every single round you're going to follow a very clear player turn order. This little player aid you have on your player board works perfectly for telling you the turn order. You're going to start with an event every single round, then you're going to go ahead and gain any income from tax. You're going to slowly be raising your tax rate throughout the game, getting the income from there. Then you'll roll your dice, which will either be 2 or 3 dice depending on whether you've unlocked that extra action, and then from there you'll choose your specific actions you want to take, because there's 7 different actions you can take in the game every single turn, and you're assigning your dice to different actions in order to take those actions, different actions that will gain you points, that will give you more military, that will gain you money, that will let you play cards, increase your city development, do a variety of different things in this game. When you're done with that, you'll move to the progress phase where you get to up one of your stats on this track. You have 3 different tracks here: your economy, your culture, and military, and those will tie into your actions as well as giving you benefits as you go up the track. So for example, you earn that extra action by moving up the culture track. If I continue to move up the culture track, I'll gain additional tax rate. If I move up the economy track, I'll go ahead and gain more settlers. But more importantly, those things will tie into these cards you play. You see 3 of these cards you play. We have culture, we have trade, and I cannot see my other card over here. I'm missing. Here we go. We have military and we have trade. Those 3 cards will correspond to your 3 tracks: economy, culture, and military. When you play trade, you'll get money based on your economy track. When you play culture, you'll gain points based on your culture track. And when you play military, you'll gain military might based on your military track. And then you'll go ahead and conquer a province. You're going to go ahead and look at this track over here. Like I said already, this is an abstracted civ game. You're going to look at this track over here and trade in some military in order to conquer one of these tokens, which have a variety of reasons you'll want them in the game, from scoring to unlocking different abilities, unlocking different cards you can play, and things like that. Then we'll go to the event resolution phase. When we're done with moving up on one of these tracks, and you have to pay a cost based on the little circle over there, then you go to the event resolution phase, where you resolve the event that was played at the beginning of the round, and finally you look at any achievements to see if players gained any of the achievements, assuming there are still any left to gain in the game. That's basically what you're doing with Khôra. Now, a few other things going on. To begin with the various actions we talked about, we've only talked about a few of these actions, and there's a variety of different ones you can play. I'm not going to focus on all of them, but I will focus on 2 more. First is your city development. Over here, I have Sparta over here, and as I move up this track, I'll gain access to either one-time use, ongoing, or scoring abilities. But you have to have the prerequisites, which means you need to pay money and or have certain tokens that you can either conquer with military or you can buy with trade. So you have to get those tokens as a prerequisite in order to be able to do these abilities, in order to be able to move past them, but they will give you strong and powerful abilities. Again, whether one-time use, scoring, or ongoing, they are all powerful and they're a joy to unlock, but you can only do so 3 times during the game because you're going to start with that first level. And then secondly is the politics action. You'll have a card. One of your actions is playing your politics cards. At the beginning of the game, you will draft 5 politics cards. These are cards that break the game. These are cards that build your tableau, that break the game, that let you do all the fun things in Khôra. And then throughout the game, you also have ways where you can draw more from the deck, but you'll generally have at least 5, possibly more as the game continues. Playing your politics action allows you to play these cards. And these cards, again, like I said, they break the game. They give you a reason to do one thing over another. You can play a card that gives you 2 extra points every time you take a trade action. You can give another card that gives you, a point and extra money and a military every time you take a trade action. You can play cards that give you endgame scoring. You can give you cards that give you 4 military, which can be a very strong starter card. Starting off the bat, out the gate with 4 military can give you a lot of access to things that other players can't do. So there's one-time use, ongoing, and scoring ability cards that will be in this hand. But again, like your development track, they will potentially require either, trade icons over there, or either those various city icons, or alternatively require money, and sometimes they'll require both. That's the politics cards in the game. Rinse and repeat for 9 rounds until you get to the end, and then you'll go through some endgame scoring. The primary one to be aware of is throughout the game you have opportunities to advance up the glory track as you get achievements, or as you move up the military track, and being high on the glory track is relevant because if you have, let's say, 6 on the glory track, you will multiply that by all these tokens that have those laurel wreaths, and that will be an extra bonus to your score. Again, a bunch of other things as well, but that's an important one to pay attention to. That is a general overview of Khôra Rise of an Empire. Build a civilization across 9 rounds, taking a variety of different actions, rolling your dice, unlock your extra action, increase your trade, culture, and military. Do all those things in order to ultimately be the player with the most points at the end of the game. That's basically everything, which brings us to the review part of this, starting off with my game preferences and biases. And those are things that generally that will impact my opinion of the game, starting most importantly with my preferences in games. I like civ building games. I like tableau building. I like powers and abilities. I like drafting cards. I like asymmetric powers. That's both a pro and a con for Khôra because it's feeding into all these things I like, but it's also measuring up against a lot of games in this genre that I very much love. And so, starting off the bat, understand that this is very much the type of game that I'm looking for, which is both a pro and a con. Going into art and components. Art is fine. I don't have any complaints, but nor is it particularly pulling me in. To some extent, I wish some of these things were a little bit more... It's more of a theme aspect, I guess, but I wish some of these tokens were more on a map so you feel like you're conquering various regions as opposed to just like a general listing. But the art's fine. Components are also fine. Not a lot to write home about, except I will say I do like these double-playered boards. In general, I love dual-player boards whenever they give you your tokens slotting in as opposed to sliding around casually, so I'm happy they included that in the game. As far as theme and narrative, again, it's fine. The theme's okay. I don't have any complaints about the theme, but it's an abstracted civ game with a very standard theme that you'd expect. You know, we have like ancient civilizations, nothing amazing. It's totally fine. It does the job, but it's nothing particularly innovative or that pulls me in any particular sense. A narrative, this is very much abstracted. Past the general idea of building out a civilization, and I will say they do have like, you know, a little bit of a history of each civilization behind it, which you could read if you want. You don't have to. But there's not a lot of narrative in this game. There's not a lot of emergent storytelling either. You're doing things to build your stats across 9 rounds, and hopefully you win the game. Which again, not a pro and a con. Just understand what you're getting yourself into. Ease of play. Rulebook is short. Teaching it is a breeze. This is a game that teaches in 5 to 10 minutes. The rulebook reads in maybe 15 minutes. It's a very accessible game to dive into, especially if you have played games in the general genre. If you're familiar with general mechanics, drafting, you know, action, there's a dice, all those things that go on in the game. If you're familiar with the general concepts, this game is very easy to pick up and to teach. The table space is fairly conservative. It has a central board, your own individual player boards, not a lot of table space, and the game length is super accessible. This is a game that your first game might run 90 minutes, but even then, as you start playing it more and more, I think you can get it down to under 60. Not that much under 60, but you can usually get it down to probably around 50 minutes or so. And it plays well at a roll. Let's get to player count. Player count. Moving on to player count. This is a 2 to 4 player game that I have played at 2 and 3 players. I have not played it at 4, but because of the simultaneous play aspect of the game, it's a game that easily stretches out to, well, have that 4th player without adding much time. Playing it at 2 and at 3 has not been a significant difference in playtime. The only time you actually have to be mindful of other players and being mindful of turn order is when you take the military action, because one player might want one of these regions, the other player might not. Past that, it's very much multiplayer solitaire. You're doing your own thing, you're going up your own tracks, a minimal amount of interaction, and that multiplayer solitaire might make it a con for you, but it does make the playtime a lot faster because of the simultaneous play. So while I have not played it at 4, I would happily play it at 4. It might add 5 minutes to the game. It shouldn't add that much. Moving on to highlights. Highlights, nitpicks, and meaningful critiques. The things I liked, didn't like, the things I liked, complain about but don't really affect my opinion, and the things that very much do affect my opinion of the game. Nitpicks will be what I started with right there a second ago, that minimal interaction. There's a very small amount of minimal interaction in the game because of the fact that you only are really competing over this area over here. Past that, it doesn't really matter what other players do, at least not in any meaningful way. There's a drop more interaction in terms of rushing for these achievements over here. That's something to be mindful of, but that's going to usually be done by the time you're like 3 or 4 rounds into the game, at which point the only interaction left are these tokens over here. So there is definitely some interaction, but a very minimal amount in the game. So it's not something that I would recommend if you want a high level of interaction in your civ building games. In-game, I skipped highlights. Wow, I'm going to jump back to highlights now. I'm moving on to nitpicks. Highlights, the things I liked about the game. Multiple paths to victory. This game has a ton of different pathways to victories, a ton of different ways you can win the game. There's a bunch of different main tracks, main strategies going on. You can go heavy in military, you can go heavy in economy, and then everything else from that kind of extrapolates down different pathways. But you need to have some way of getting things in the game. And a military approach will get you some money as you conquer different provinces, so you can get money money that way. An economy approach will give you money because you're going economy, and from there how you split does matter. You can try to pursue different pathways in terms of the cards you get, a variety of politics cards, because the politics cards for sure are one of my favorite part of the game, because there's a whole stack of these cards, and some of them are just game breaking in what they do. Some of them will give you reasons why you should pursue different strategies, and you'll draft your initial starting hand. You'll be like, well, I can do this, that, or the other. Which pathway do I want to go? Do I want to focus on that military? Do I want to focus on the economy? Maybe I just want to go culture the whole game and just starting points, go every single turn, just play a culture card and just start racking up those points, because you can get a lot of points if you do that effectively. But you're doing so at the cost of building up your empire. But so which way do you want to approach the game? You need to go at least some military or economy, but the way you diversify out from there is fairly variable. And then you have the asymmetric player powers. Each of these player powers, and there's a whole bunch of them. You have all these ones over here. You have the starting ones. I think you have like something like 7 or so player powers. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 7 player powers, and they each give you a very different, strong advantage. This is not some small thing where you're like, I start with 1 extra on the economy track. No, these give you huge game-breaking effects that you're going to look at someone else's player power and be like, I can't believe you have that. But meanwhile, they're looking at your player power and being like, that's so broken. They're all broken, and they will push your strategy in a certain direction. So you can draft, you can take a variety of player powers, start the game, and pick one. That's what we've been doing. But it will give you a lot of things to do, a lot of different ways. It's a very rewarding tableau is what's happening here. It's a very rewarding tableau as you build up your different things, as you build up your economy, culture, and military, as you build up your tax, as you move up the glory track, as you get progressively stronger in military, as you move up your development tracks, as you play more politics cards. Your tableau across those 9 rounds gets progressively more and more rewarding in the game. Every decision matters, and there are no easy answers as you play. You're frequently going to be trying to like min-max out, well, if I do this round, but I can't do this round, I can do this, I can either play my politics card or my development, I don't have the resources to do both, which one is better for me? Because obviously I want them both now. There's only 5 rounds left in the game, and whichever one I have for longer is better, but which one is better? And you have to make those decisions on a regular basis, and the math on this game, board games in general are, to a large extent, math buried behind layers of decisions and theme and things like that. But the math is very present, but it's also not obvious, which is good. You can't sit there and simply perfectly scheme out exactly what the right thing to do is. There's a lot of gut feeling going on in the game, a lot of gut decisions around what makes the most sense for you, and I love those decisions. Moving on to Nitpicks in its appropriate section. Nitpicks, starting off with that minimal player interaction, we talked about that already. You can see the start of the highlights for that. But past that, the endgame versus in-game scoring. Again, small nitpick, not a huge deal, but the endgame versus in-game scoring can be huge in this game. You can have players who are slowly moving around the track, slowly chugging along, and they'll get to 100 points, whatever it is, and that's fine. And then they'll get 6 points of endgame scoring. You can also have players who get 30 points in-game, and then get 72 points of endgame scoring. Now, this could be a pro or a con. In fact, I would say normally I like it when the scores of a game are not obvious, because it means that you're invested the entire time as you play. You're not sitting there halfway through the game feeling checked out. But I would say Khôra, in a weird way, the huge gap, it's not that the scores are hidden, and it's not that there's a ton of endgame scoring for everyone. There's a huge gap between that endgame and in-game scoring that can make it slightly frustrating for players who either want to see what's going on, or possibly players who feel defeated when they aren't. You might be 70 points behind, but you're really just pursuing a strong military strategy, and you're going to end with another 72 points at the end of the game and win the game. So that is something to be mindful of, not really a critique, again, small little nitpick of there. There's a clock in the game, a 9-round clock. Now this is something I should have referenced in my game preferences in general at the beginning of this video. I love tableau building games. I don't love tableau building games that give me an inherent clock on it. For myself, I tend to prefer the players being the clock. It's not that there's 7 rounds, it's that we have to do X, Y, and Z, and whoever gets more points will be better at it. Or maybe we have to get to X points, but the players are doing that collectively. I don't love a fixed clock on games in general, and Khôra is not going to be an exception to that. There are exceptions, but Khôra is not one of those exceptions for me. The 9 rounds in the game have resulted in some plays where I felt like I got what I wanted done. The combination of politics cards, the combination of development that I had, the way the early game played out. There are certainly games where I've played of Khôra where I got enough done and I was happy with those 9 rounds. But I would say just as often, I'm not. Just as often when I sit down to play this, I play through the 9 rounds and I don't get enough done, and I've had scores where my score is literally half what a score is in a prior game. Sometimes the engine doesn't click, and that's when the 9 rounds feels a little too constrictive, a little too punishing. And especially because of that variable amount of the variable amount of how much you can get done, it certainly can be a slight nitpick there. And then lastly for nitpicks, the military. Military in the game is one of multiple viable strategies, and I don't think it's necessarily the strongest one, nor do I think it's essential. I don't. I've won games of Khôra without going any military whatsoever, past the incidental amount I happen to get. So I don't think it's an essential strategy, but it can be slightly less fun if you don't go military, and that's because of the events. Almost all of the events either favor nothing in particular, meaning all players gain, 3 this or 3 that, or all players lose 2 money. Alternatively, the events favor the strongest military. So that means that if you play this game and you don't go military in the game, understand that you will frequently be being hit by the events. And even though I think strategically it's viable, it makes not going military less fun. When you sign up for a game of Khôra and you don't go military, it means you're just going to be frequently hit by things. You're going to be just have that event deck just slapping you the back of your head as you play the game, which isn't the most fun feeling, even if it is strategically viable. So I'm not a huge fan of the way the game does that. Which brings us to meaningful critiques, and there's really just one large meaningful critique as far as Khôra, and that will be that the amount of luck in the game. And I'll explain what I mean by that, because it's not like luck of rolling dice doesn't bother me at all. The amount of luck in the game in terms of how high your scores can be, and specifically in terms of the combination of your development and your politics cards, can be huge in this game. You will get your initial draft of politics cards, and you will draft them, so there is player agency in that sense. You're not being handed a blind pick of 5 cards. But then, both in the initial draft, even though you're drafting them, the way you might get cards that cohesively sync up with your civilization, or the way as you go through the game when you draw 2 cards on the top of the deck, some players will get great picks, and you might get 2 dead cards that just don't work for you at all. And that's one of a handful of actions you have in the game, and so it matters a lot. There is a degree of luck in terms of the way your things sync up in Khôra, the way your politics cards work with your development and work with your ongoing strategy in the game. And that has resulted that I don't know if I want to say every, almost every time I've played Khôra, there has been at least one player who was half the score of the first player. That's a large gap to get over, and that can make it a frustrating experience for that player in last, especially if it's their first play of the game. I like games that have winners and losers. I'm not against that, but I like it when the scores are tight. I like it when I see, oh, you tried this, I tried that. Now, obviously, player skill is a factor, but I'm talking about playing with my usual game group, where usually in most games, we don't see that kind of point-scoring gap in this game. And in Khôra, we do. When we play other games that have, point scoring, limited number of rounds, whatever it is, usually our scores are closer. In Khôra, almost every time, perhaps every time, but I'm not certain, almost every time we've played Khôra, there's been one player who is literally half or less than the player in the first place because they didn't get the things they needed to sync up. I don't think they were playing poorly. I don't think they don't know what's going on. I think Khôra rewards a degree of strategy, but also a degree of luck in terms of the way things match up, and that can absolutely take away from the experience. Which brings me to final thoughts on Khôra. I really enjoyed Khôra quite a bit. I like tableau building. I like civ building. I enjoy that genre of games, and this did give it to me. I like moving up the tracks. I like getting politics cards. That initial politics card draft is so tight because no matter what you get, there's something in your hand that's powerful. And there's a moment. If you've played drafting games, you know this moment. And that moment is when somebody else passes you a hand of cards, and you're like, you passed me this? What did you take? And Khôra has that moment. You get passed cards that are so strong that you're like, what in the world did you take that this was passed to me? So I love the draft, I love the civ building, I love all those things in the game. At the same time, despite the multiple pathways to victories, this game is also abstracted enough that combined with the variable point scoring, it's one that I really enjoy, but also don't love. I really enjoy Khôra. I'm happy to play it again, but it's one that, given other similar games in this genre that I'm weighing it up against, it's one that I'm happy to table, happy to play, but not one I'm necessarily asking to play past, well, my plays until now. If you're looking for recommendations for other games in this genre, if you like abstracted, light civ building games, Seven Wonders is always a classic, and Adara is another one that is not quite as well known, but does the same job of, abstracted, light civ building with a little bit of, I don't even think it has drafting, I can't recall. And then if you're looking for something that will take it up a notch, that will be a lot longer of a game and a lot more going on, then I always recommend Terraforming Mars. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.